Good morning, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery for a morning of Dhamma. I am Ayya Soma, and we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namassami. So this morning, the topic selected was celebrity culture and the Dhamma. And so what comes to mind are actually the first verses of the Mangala Sutta, where we see the Buddha saying precisely these verses. Maybe I'll recite them in Pali first, and then I'll give a bit of a sort of translation. And he says, Asevana chapalanam panditanam chasevana puja chapujaniyanam etam mangalam uttamam. And so what these verses essentially say are they are an encouragement of not associating with the fools. So sevana chapalanam, not associating with the unwise, with the people that are a little bit crazy. But instead, panditanam chasevanam, to serve, to honor the wise, to associate with the wise, to serve the wise. And then the last, essentially, verse is to literally puja. Maybe we can reflect on exactly this term. What does this term remind us of? Puja is usually when we actually give the offerings, for example, in Buddhism to the Buddha, when we take the time to honor and pay respects to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, right? Usually in monasteries, we have at least two pujas, one in the morning and one in the evening. So we puja the wise, the most wise, the honorable one, the Buddha. And so it's very interesting how the Buddha once again encourages us to literally make offerings to those who are wise. And why is that so? We actually see throughout the suttas how the Buddha very often actually in some different iterations of dependent origination in Paticcasamuppada, he actually puts reverence and deference as the conditions in order to cultivate the mind and in order to produce a mind that essentially is grounded in sila, that is grounded in concentration, that is grounded in wisdom, that is grounded then in liberation. So we see how important this is, that it's exactly, one of those fundamental paths, one of those fundamental elements that lead us essentially to Nibbana. And we also see how actually there's several points where we see the Buddha actually right after his awakening. His thought was, well, now that I'm fully awakened, who can I honor? Who can I revere? And he says, usually if someone has no one to revere, no one to honor, that mind of that being dwells in suffering. But then obviously right after he recollects, well, actually, I've done the job, I've done the work. So there is actually no no reason for my mind, to need any type of reverence and deference, if only for the Dhamma. Because, actually, reverence and deference are supportive measures in order to, once again, develop virtue, which I have developed, to develop full samadhi, which I have developed, to develop full knowledge as I've developed, and so forth, right? So he understands, as a fully enlightened being, he understands that actually there is no need to dwell in reverence and deference towards one particular person, but rather towards the Dhamma. Of course, we're not the Buddha, so we still have actually some way to go, right? And it's very important to then understand, take a little bit of some advice, some pointers from the unenlightened Buddha. Or rather, so what did the Buddha do previous to his enlightenment? What did the Buddha do in order to become the Buddha? What did the Buddha do in order to become awakened? And so also in how he essentially addresses, asks himself the question of who is there to honor, who is there to rely upon, right? Right after his awakening, obviously that is a question that he has created out of compassion for all of us walking in his footsteps. Because by giving us essentially this information, he pretty much points us to the first blessing, right, that we see in the Mangala Sutta, the one that I recited, the one that it's not associating with the fools, but actually associating with the wise, and giving them offerings. There is this beautiful, actually, Italian saying in Naples that one can translate essentially as an encouragement to always associate with people who are better than us, and then to make offerings to them. So we can see how the Dhamma sometimes really can be found in so many different corners, so many different angles that are not necessarily what we would call Buddhist, but they're actually, part of this common sense. Although there's this other beautiful saying in English, common sense is not that common, right? So we see how when we actually approach the Dhamma, we see the common sense of the Dhamma, but then we also see how difficult it is to actually cultivate common sense and to practice common sense. But there is this, once again, sense in very much every culture that one needs to. It's very important who we surround ourselves with, and how do these people essentially nurture our mind. How do these people essentially inspire us to move forward in the path? And what are fundamentally the values? Why do we actually think that someone is worthy of honoring? Why do we think that someone is worthy of praise? Why do we look up to someone? What are we looking for? What kind of qualities are dear to us, right? And so when we take the Buddha, for example, as the foremost, when we do puja to the Buddha in the morning, in the evening, and maybe possible multiple times during the day, when we make offerings like incense or flower to the Buddha, essentially what we're doing is recollecting the qualities of the Buddha, right? Itipiso Bhagavaraham Samma Sambuddho, right? And so forth. So where we see Araham actually is a very beautiful quality of the Buddha that actually means that he is in fact worthy of offerings. And how is one worthy of offerings? Well, the Buddha also reminds us monastics that we will only be worthy of offerings, even though just like him, we're constantly, in this situation where we don't own anything. We are in this state of poverty, of chosen poverty, and we rely entirely on the offerings of the lay people, just like the Buddha, right? But contrarily to the Buddha, unless we have actually attained all that there needs to be attained, then we're actually not worthy of these offerings. or rather, we are only worthy of these offerings once we attain awakening, once we remove all of the defilements. And so the Buddha encourages us to reflect on that, so that we actually put effort and time into doing what needs to be done, right? And so the Buddha is actually someone who is worthy of offering, who is not eating the food that is given to him on debt, but rather he has done what needs to be done, so he's worthy of everything that is given to him. He's also worthy of honor and praise. He's worthy of all of that, right? So that is one of the qualities that we recollect of the Buddha, together with obviously him being an excellent teacher of both devas and human beings, of anyone who wants to be trained. He's completely enlightened and so forth, right? So all of these beautiful, incredible qualities, right, of the Buddha, that he knows, he understands the world, he understands everything, he understands this world and the other world, he understands dependent origination, he understands everything, how this whole mass of suffering comes into being. So we're like, wow, this human is incredible, this human is really special, and I can also become just like the Buddha, right? And the Buddha has practiced this Dhamma. This is how the Buddha has realized this Dhamma, has found this Dhamma, matured it, practiced it, and attained liberation. And I too can, honor this Dhamma and practice this Dhamma and attain the same accomplishments of the Buddha. Just like the Sangha, right? The Sangha of both male monastics, female monastics, laymen and laywomen who have practiced these teachings and attained full liberation, right? So me too, this is accessible to me as well. I can be part of the Ayya Sangha, so the noble Sangha, the one that has actually realized all of that. And so we see how this uplifts the mind, right? So how our mind starts going in that specific direction, in the direction of the Buddha, in the direction of the Dhamma, in the direction of the Sangha. But when we start, these days having different role models, right? When we start looking instead in a different direction, where we're perhaps instead inspired by what we call celebrities. Who are the celebrities these days? Who do we talk about? The people who are dying, for example, or the people who are successful, or the people that we're looking up to. So sometimes it's singers, sometimes it's actors, sometimes it's billionaires, sometimes it's actually people that are on reality TV that don't have particular even talent. Sometimes there are people that actually just have a social media presence, right? And so we are constantly bombarded maybe by these images, and we take on these images, we take on these people that perhaps we're watching, we're looking at through the form of entertainment, thinking that maybe there's not even that much of a big deal. It's just a movie, or maybe it's just a TV series, or maybe it's just, Netflix after work, whatever it is. But we start taking on these different role models. And what are these role models essentially talking to us? What are they? What kind of, instead, path is it leading to? Is it a similar path to the one that the Buddha is indicating? Are these people actually embodying qualities similar to the Buddha? Or are they actually embodying qualities that are a little bit instead closer to the fools that we were talking about in the Mangala Sutta, right? And so we start seeing how the mind then can start associating with qualities, start associating with people, start associating with lifestyles that actually lead us a little bit astray, that lead us a little bit towards suffering rather than towards the cessation of suffering. Associating with someone perhaps that puts greed, puts accumulation, puts wealth, material wealth, above all. And we start thinking, well, maybe I need to be as skinny as this person, or maybe as stylish as this person, or maybe I need to beautify myself in that way and not that way. Maybe I need to have really, really long nails, right? It's very interesting now that I am a monastic and I am completely outside of everything that happens in the world, that it's very interesting, going from the United States to Italy and seeing all these like trends that are very, very similar one with another, right? People looking up to similar celebrities and starting to look in the same way. And the reason why I don't know really much anything about the celebrity, but I start identifying that there must be some kind of celebrity because of the way, the uniformity that the people look. And so we see how these days, maybe I would say that perhaps it's a degenerate, era of Dhamma. Not necessarily because we don't have the teachings available of the Buddha. Actually, as a matter of fact, I don't think we've ever had so much access to so many teachings, right? You go to suttacentral.net and you have, wow, with one click, like, ah, so much Dhamma. It's incredible. I don't think even at the time of the Buddha, actually, people would have access to so many teachings at once unless they have developed superpowers. But rather, I would say that probably the kind of what we can call, quote unquote, degenerate these days is really the lack of these beautiful role models to look up to. And also the lack of that tendency of mind culturally to uplift, like to put up on pedestals what needs to be both the people and the qualities that need to actually be put on pedestals. And instead we put on pedestals foolish qualities and fools, or people who are not really that impressive, in the sense they might be impressive in one particular aspect of their life, but everything else is a little bit of a mess. So unless one just wants to be, wants to learn how to be a really great, I don't know, guitar player or singer or whatever, there's not really much that one can learn by just an average sort of defiled big bundle of mess guitar player or singer, right? So instead, someone like the Buddha, everybody can learn from someone so developed, whether they are a guitar player, whether they are a singer, whether they are a waiter, whether they are a lawyer, whether they are, cleaning person, whether they are whatever, wherever they are, whoever they are, whether they're even unemployed, because it's actually about cultivating the mind. It's not about doing some kind of trivial thing, but rather it is this aspiration of really becoming someone better. And when we become someone better, then our suffering decreases. And we see, in fact, how this is actually not the case. Often when instead we're pursuing what we see in so-called celebrity culture and these kind of other role models, right? We see actually even them. Usually there's a lot of mental health, mental anguish. People sometimes kill themselves at a very young age, even though they're quite successful. Or perhaps they start creating all sorts of addictions, all sorts of different ways to cope, even with the fame, with the honor, with the praise that can come through those circumstances. And so we can see actually also through our sort of foolish role models how actually those actions don't lead towards the cessation of suffering, but rather actually sometimes increase the suffering, or sometimes it's just exactly as it was before. So not big difference. And so it's very important to be quite careful and quite intentional with who we're associating with. And that doesn't only mean our friends, which hopefully as good Buddhists, we surround ourselves with kalyanamita friends. So with also friends that share our same aspirations towards awakening. But also that we are a little bit deliberate also in what are we watching, what are we consuming, who are we quote unquote following on social media, what we are introducing, what kind of material we're introducing in our mind. That's why also the 8 precepts are so important to actually, like, sometimes even for lay people to go on the 8 precepts and detox from all of this from time to time, so that we can actually be more empowered to make better choices, right? So as monastics, we completely avoid entertainment. We completely avoid TV series and all of that. We completely avoid following such and such celebrity here and there. So we actually don't know anything about them. And it's just so freeing. It's so incredibly liberating. And one can also see the craziness and the silliness actually of certain trends. But it's so difficult, once again, when one is in bed in all of that, to actually distinguish kusala from akusala. And sometimes certain actions that we make aren't really even decisions that we make, but they are dependently arisen, right? So they are a natural consequence of other actions that we've done in the past, which can be as simple as following such and such celebrity, and once again, also watching such and such movie. So we can kind of eliminate all of that and instead introduce more and more Dhamma in our life. All right, so maybe at this point I'll end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. At this point, if there are any questions, feel free to write them on the screen. And hello to some friends: John, Richard, Manal, Pianatta, Pili, good to see you, Chantavong, Salvatore, good to see you, Hayang, Sud, Niranjan, Jayanta, Heglika, and Tu, good to see you all. And Hayang asks, what are the possible future bad karmic effects of Sangha members who receive daily offerings from lay people but do not practice the Dharma or uphold the precepts? That's a very, very, very good question. Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to say exactly what exactly is the vipaka. That's the term that we use for the consequences of karma, which is an intentional action. So it's difficult to make a generalization, because actually karma is quite complex. So the Buddha also encourages us in the suttas to reflect that only just one like him can actually really predict, because it's not just one action that creates one result, but rather it's a lot of different actions that get, it's kind of a sort of web, right? That then creates the result when all the conditions are there at the right time. This being said, we can definitely recognize when an action is wholesome and when an action is unwholesome. And I would say that those indications of the Buddha to us monastics to reflect that we are independent with the lay people, that our entire life is supported by the generous offerings of lay people, is a kind of skillful mean to really push us, to really dedicate us there. So I would say that if someone is not practicing the Dhamma or upholding the precepts, to what extent are they doing that? So for example, if a Sangha member is lazy, well, yeah, that's not really the best situation, but they're still, kind of trying to cope there. But if actually a Sangha member is, for example, not only being lazy, so not only not putting effort in eliminating greed, hatred, and delusion in their mind, but instead actually making bad choices. So perhaps stealing the donations. So perhaps actually um, breaking precepts altogether, and being devious and being malicious and trying to extort things from the lay people, well, then that's a significantly more serious offense, right? More significantly serious bad karma, which has definitely bad consequences. Because also whenever we do something with these robes on, it actually has also a significantly higher degree of karma, degree of weight. Because one thing, for example, is if we see, just a lay person stealing, $5 maybe in a shop, right? We might think, oh, that's really bad. But if we see someone who's wearing these robes doing the same action, that's wow, that's really horrible. And it not only reflects on that person, not only reflects on that monastic, but actually reflects on the entire Sangha. Because usually when people, for example, relate to me, they don't relate to me as Ayya Soma, but they relate to me as a Buddhist monk, right? And so anything that Ayya Soma does reflects on Ayya Soma and on the entire Buddhist Sangha. So it's actually very, very, yeah, it's a big responsibility. And whenever we are acting unskillfully, especially, the more grave offenses, then that is really hindering the faith of the people who have faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and also who hindering the faith of people who are skeptical or maybe like don't know exactly what Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha are, right? So it's completely eliminating even any kind of a drop of interest that they might have towards liberation. So I would say that then obviously we will create conditions where it will be a little bit more difficult for us to actually have access to the pure teachings, to have access to the holy life, to have access to, yeah, to real awakening in the future. And maybe it will create more dodgy sort of situations for us. So we can kind of see, that it's really going towards a direction, perhaps also of being subjected to, being surrounded by devious people. So then more conditions for delusion, which are really not good, because delusion is the hardest to actually remove, to detect in our minds, and then to uproot. So definitely don't want to do that. So thank you for your question. And Yang also has another question. How do we recognize fake Sangha members and deal with them without breaking our precepts? Oh, that's a very good question again. Well, I would say I learn a lot, both from the suttas and also from lay people who are born in Buddhist countries. They actually have a very interesting way of going about the world. So sometimes, some of our friends here that support us at Empty Cloud, they are also quite vocal about supporting certain monastics that actually their sila is not that great, and rather they don't phrase it that way, but they kind of like they make it understand that that maybe it's a dodgy temple or not one that they necessarily want to go to, but they will still go and offer alms, right? They'll still go and help out if needed. And I find it very, very interesting, because here in the West, usually we're actually, or us convert Buddhists, as I like to call ourselves, we can be very, very much, definitely as a lay person, I was very, like I would look at that and make, my assessments. But we see also in the book, in the suttas. One of my favorite suttas is the sutta of Uga, the householder, one of the foremost disciples, the disciples of the Buddha. And he, if I remember correctly, he's a non-returner. And at a certain point, there's this sutta where he talks about the great qualities of Uga, the householder. And one of them is actually that since he has cultivated all these qualities of mind, he has superpowers, so he can read the minds of others, but also he has devas that can come and tell him, look, that monastic is a good monastic, he follows the sila really well, or that other monastic is not really that pure. And so he actually knows exactly who is a good monastic and who is a bad monastic. But he says that one of the great qualities of Uga, the householder, is that even though he knows the difference, he will give the same amount of food to the good monastic and the bad monastic, which I find extremely adorable. And that is because I seem to understand that the encouragement, which we see also in the suttas, the encouragement also of the Buddha. In other places in the sutta, he says that, of course, there is more merit, for example, to give to a Buddha. And of course, after that, there is more merit to give to an Arahat. And of course, after that, someone who is genuinely practicing towards levels of realizations and so forth. And then after that, the purest one, etc. But actually also the kind of not the most diligent monastic. It's still, an offering towards the Sangha. We're not supporting the individual, but we are supporting the Sangha as a whole, as an institution. And so also, the sort of worst kind of monastic still gives the opportunity for people to make merit to a certain degree. And in that way, actually, the offering is purified, as the Buddha says, right? In the Dakinavipanga Sutta. So it's purified by the intention of either the giver or the receiver, and optimally by both the giver and of the receiver. So I would say that our duty is just our own actions, because we can also be deluded and then start criticizing people that shouldn't be criticized, and not criticize or praise people that should be instead criticized, right? Because it's just a process of delusion. So I would say that what we can do is control our own mind and control our own actions. And so we can go, okay, well, I'm empowered to support. So if there is someone in front of me, I'll support them as best as I can. And then, if it's a fake monastic, in the sense of the fake monastics that, for example, are here in New York City, then those are clearly, obviously not ordained monastics. So if you're talking about that, then those, you can recognize them, because usually they have jeans under their robes or some kind of item of lay clothing. But if you're talking about fake monastics in terms of the monastic that is not perhaps the best at Sila or etc., then they're still monastics. They're just perhaps struggling with the bad karma that they've done in the past, but at least they're doing whatever they're trying to do. Obviously, if we know that there is something really concerning in a community, and these days it's very easy to find out. You can just put the name of the community on Google and put right after scandal, or right after cult, or right after one of those terms. And then if you know that, if you find information online along those lines, one can just stay as clear as possible. But if we're just going to a random temple and we don't really know the monastics, and we're like, these monastics maybe are not as impressive as the other monastics that I've seen in that other village, and maybe, I don't know, the mind can create a lot of different, a lot of papancha, a lot of different ideas that maybe are not particularly useful, right? And sometimes it can also be a product of our likes and dislikes. I like these monastics more than those other monastics, and that's not great. So I would say that, once again, first and foremost, we have to see what our intentions are, what are the qualities of our mind when we are actually relating to others, and in particular the Sangha. And Kit says, what about having a job working with celebrities, specifically getting them work and increasing their fame? I try to work with those who are ethical and have taken work from those that aren't. Thank you so much, Kate. Well, I used to actually, in my previous life, within this life, I also used to have a similar job. And yeah, it can get very, very tricky in the sense that, I mean, it's very difficult as a layperson, obviously, to find, to have a job that is 100% completely ethical. Mm, So what we want to do is, what I advise is more something a little bit more realistic, which is, of course, avoiding all the different jobs that the Buddha highlights, like that are involved with killing, with stealing, and so forth, right? So that we want to stay completely away, and that is not the case. You're not actually in that field. But when you are in a field where you see that there are certain situations where you feel compromised, well, just try to do some harm reduction. And I feel like you're already on the right path, in the way that you're trying to work with those who are ethical. And yeah, and you keep doing that, and you try to not work as much as it's possible and feasible for you as a layperson to live, um, with those who are not ethical, right? So reducing to, and then up, it will get to a point where you have reduced so much that it's not a problem anymore. And so that way it's a little bit more realistic. But we'll see also that the more we reduce, at least that was my experience, the more I was reducing, the more I was refusing, the more actually I have to also renounce certain things, right? Because I was earning less. So then simply I had to actually live in a more simple life, more simple way. And that also created sort of a double boon, the boon of like the happiness of not having to deal with unsufferable people, not having to deal also with the kind of ethical conundrum, the question like, what am I doing with my time? Really, is this person worthy of actually being so popular, and I'm helping them being so popular, and they influence people in this way or this other way? And kind of that realization that used to make me very much suffer, of essentially being part of samsara, of that wheel, where I actually was both creating suffering and also becoming the recipient of the suffering. And so that was actually really distressing for me. So then after a while I started cutting out and stopping taking on those clients. But it was a bit of a gradual thing, right? So that, as I mentioned, the more I was doing that, the more JOMO, the more joy of missing out was coming in my mind. And then also conversely, then my mind was more free. I had more time to actually pursue um, more ethical clients, more ethical jobs. Yeah, you have a lot more more opening. So I hope that helps. And oops, Manal says, thank you for shedding light on the value of reverence and observing Dhamma more deeply. Well, thank you all. Yeah, it's always a very, very constant reflection that I try to keep in mind, how and why the Buddha places so much importance, because it's so also something very particular of this day and age. We can get very informal with one another, we can get very chilled, as we say, and that can sometimes it's okay, but sometimes it can go very close to disrespectful. And so then we are essentially eliminating one of the most important pillars of this dependent origination that the Buddha, gives us, shares with us. So without that pillar, of reverence and deference, then it's very difficult to develop oneself in the path, develop sila, samadhi, and panya, develop true liberation, develop nibbana, right? So it's really important that we really acknowledge and recollect how this is. It's not something, whenever we are reverent and deferent, it's not something that we're doing necessarily to the other person, but rather we are actually doing the first and foremost gift to ourselves, because we are the ones benefiting. We are the ones who are cultivating the mind. We are the ones who are becoming enabled to attain awakening, to remove and uproot suffering. All right, so that is the last comment and questions that we had for this morning. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. If you have any other questions, feel free to type them in on the chat on Monk Chat, which is another stream that will be happening this evening at 7:30 p.m. New York City time. And I will be here at Empty Cloud with Bhante Sudaso and possibly another monastic to answer all of your questions. All right, so we can end the morning with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be well and happy, and may all good things come to you.